I'll get us started. Stu's going to take us through a bunch of the bills that are still live that we're concerned with. But I just wanted to remind everybody that the legislature has left for recess. There are no more policy hearings, just appropriations committee hearings. On August 6th, the legislature will be back. By August 16th, all bills have to be reported out of appropriations. Starting August 19th, it will be floor sessions only to vote on the bills. August 23rd is the last day for bills to be amended on the floor. And August 31st is the last day for each house to pass bills. And then they go into final recess. So, in the next 6 weeks, we're sort of coming up on the end of it all. There's a few things that we can still do. But with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Stu.
Before you do that, could you put these dates in chat or something, Rick?
Sure.
I couldn't get them all. Sorry.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the major bills. These are what we consider our priority bills. They are, unfortunately, they're all bills we're opposing. We have gotten a couple of bills that we supported passed, but a lot of bills, both bills we supported and bills we opposed, have been knocked out due to the deficit. The appropriations committees in the first houses have knocked out more than the usual. I think it was about 30% of bills got knocked out by the appropriations committees in the two houses, based on the fact that they were going to require significant expenditures, and with the deficit that was showing up, which I don't know that it's entirely been solved yet, but they claim it has. But with that deficit, the word was, if you're asking for a bunch of money to do something, you need to not do it this year. So that knocked out a lot of the bills we were supporting. It also knocked out some of the bills we were opposing. But we have 9 bills left that are our priority bills to oppose, and they are all in their respective appropriations committees in the second house. So all of these bills have passed their first house, are now in the appropriations committee in the second house, and then will be going to the floor, assuming they don't get held in appropriations. And our goal, excuse me, we generally, with bills in appropriation in the second house, they don't kill the bills. They don't generally reject the bills entirely. What they will do is they will put them in what's called the suspense file, which means they are being held and will not go forward until or unless they get out of the suspense file. And at the end of the session, in that second house's appropriations committee, if you get put in the suspense file and you don't get pulled back out, your bill is dead. So that's the situation we're in. I have, let me just share this for a moment. Okay, so what I'm sharing here is the site in the legislature, LegInfo it's called, and this is where you can look up bills. I put the link to that in the chat. It's near the beginning of the chat. https://leginfo.legislature.ca.gov and so forth. When you get to this site, you can enter the bill number for a bill, and then it will take you. So, for example, let's put in.
It'd be 2560.
Well, I'm going to put in SB7.
Oh, okay.
So this is a bill, and now you can see here's when it was introduced and when it was finally the last amendment. The last amendment will be at the top, and then you can also see a lot of other things. You can see the text of the bill. You can download a PDF of the bill if you want to keep it to look at later. You can look at the history of the bill, where it's been. You can look at the votes on the bill in the various committees and in the houses, and you can look at the bill analyses. And that's probably the most important part here at this point, because this will show each of the committee reports as to what that committee staff when they looked at the bill, that was their recommendations and their comments about the bill. And there's also for the first house, at least so far, there'll be a report on what the floor analysis was before that first house's vote. Those are things that I'll be showing a little bit of that today, but that gives you a lot of detailed information about what the staff of these committees, who are generally quite knowledgeable, what they have seen as being the major aspects of the bill and its major strengths and weaknesses. Libby, you had a question?
I was just going to say, and it also lists opposition and
right, and I'll be getting back to that. The bill analyses at the end of the bill, it'll show, in addition to often showing the bill's sponsor. And by the way, on the bills that we're going to be talking about, I'll show both the author and the sponsor, and it's important to understand the difference. The author is the legislator or legislatures that introduced the bill. The sponsors are the people who actually wrote the bill. They are the people who came to the legislature and said, here, we would like you to put this bill forward. And a lot of times that's who's really behind the bill. And they will be the groups that are orchestrating support and are trying to push the bill through. So in a lot of the cases here, one of the major ones is Cal YIMBY. Not surprisingly, there are other groups, and you'll see them as we go through the bills. But so LegInfo is a good site to start with if you're trying to find out more information about the bills. We will also on Livable California's website, we'll have the details that I'll be going through today of the various bills, which is really just sort of a quick and dirty analysis of the bill and some of the major information about it. And there will also be on the LC site the letters that we have sent in the past for a lot of these bills. And those are helpful not only in terms of what they say, but to give you an idea of the format. And what we've learned over the years is when you're sending a letter in, you need it to be no more than one page and preferably no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs. You just want to say, this is the bill, this is what it's about, this is what we don't like about it, or for that matter, this is what we like about it. And then a little bit about yourself or your group and why you are opposing or supporting the bill. So that's it. It's really very, very sharp and quick and to the point. Unfortunately, the legislators don't have a lot of time to read through a lot of detailed explanations about why this bill is good or bad. It's got to be put down there very, very succinctly. So that's where we're at. And let me go now. Just a second. Let me go to what were the bills we're going to be looking at. Okay. So here's the bills that we're going to be looking at. And there are a set of Senate bills that are now in Assembly Appropriations. The chair of that, by the way, is one of our old friends, Buffy Wicks. So we are probably not going to have much luck with getting bills held in the Assembly Appropriations, because Buffy Wicks has been a very big fan of YIMBY and YIMBY focused bills. The Senate, on the other hand, the chair is Ana Caballero. We have in the past had some luck in talking to her, and you may have some luck in convincing her that a bill should be held. Once these bills pass the appropriations, they will go to the floor, and then the key thing is knowing who your legislator is and writing to them and urging them to oppose these bills, because that's the last stop. I'll talk about a couple exceptions to that, the main one being SB 7, because that it's not technically what's called gut and amend, but it's pretty close. What it amounted to was the author totally rewrote the bill after it had passed the first house. So the bill that is before the assembly is entirely different. I'm sorry, that is before the assembly. That's SB 7. That bill is entirely different than the bill that passed the Senate. And what that means is after it passes the assembly, it then will have to go back to the Senate to get concurrence in the major changes that have been made. Unfortunately, I don't think it ends up going back to a policy committee. It just goes straight from the assembly floor to the Senate floor. So that will be in the very closing days of the session. It's the last hope to knock it out. But given that it's going back to the house that it started in, and the house that started tends to be more favorable to the bills than the other house, it's not the chances of knocking it out when it goes back to the Senate are not great. But those are the two possibilities after if it gets out of Buffy Wicks's committee, is to knock it out on the assembly floor or to knock it out on the Senate floor for concurrence. So that's the general thrust of, and what you'll see is we have 5 bills that are Senate bills that we're still looking at, and 4 bills that are assembly bills. This bill 2560, it's in brackets because that bill had major amendments made to it in the Senate, and a lot of the bills that had opposed it have gone neutral. They are not opposing it anymore, and we'll talk some more about the details of that. But I'm going to start with the assembly bills, going through them one by one, and then go on to the Senate bills. Does anyone have any questions just in general about where we're at and what's going on?
Was 7 the Blake and Spear one?
That's Blake and Spear. It was sponsored intercity law, and that's about RENA goals.
Okay, and she did a gut and amend like after it had gotten out of the assembly and wound up in Senate.
That's correct.
That's deplorable. I've never heard of that before.
Oh, it happens all the time. It's a very common end of session action. It does complicate things, and there are some limitations that have been placed on things to cure some of the most outrageous examples of gut and amend. So, for example, they would have something that would be gut and amended 3 days before the end of the session, would be brought to the floor, directly to the floor, and approved, and then sent to the other house and approved, and the whole thing would take maybe 48 hours.
Jeez.
With almost no chance. Now, I believe it has to be in writing. It has to be in print for at least 36 hours before it can be voted on by the floor.
Okay.
So
and she's got those 2 other awful anti-coastal commission things. She's a piece of work. She's like Buffy. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much.
Sure. So so I'm going to go back and start going through these bills one by one. Let's start with the assembly bills. And the first one of those is one from Buffy Wicks, which was sponsored by the Attorney General, Rob Bonta. And that's AB 1893. And this is an amendment to the Housing Accountability Act. Can everybody see the what's written on this? Is the print big enough, or does it need to be any larger?
A little bigger, please.
A little bigger. Okay, hold on just a second. Here we go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so this has to do with the Housing Accountability Act, and if you remember, the Housing Accountability Act is this bill originally written way back in the 1980s, and the aim of it was to prevent NIMBYs from blocking a project just because they didn't like it, without any justification. And this bill requires that you be able to explain that the local agency has to be able to explain why the project cannot be approved, and why it had to be modified in ways that would decrease its utility as a housing project. So, for example, maybe it had been a 90-unit housing project, and the city said, no, you got to reduce it to 45. And they said, we're not going to approve it at 90, we'll only approve it at 45 or less. And they didn't really provide an adequate justification as to why it really needed to be knocked down that much. So this bill was supposed to say, no, you have to be able to explain and justify why you're changing the project or why you're denying the project. And over time, it's become more and more specific, more and more onerous. The major thing that limits its applicability is they have to be at least 20% affordable housing, 20% for permanently affordable housing. And so in other words, if you're coming in with a huge market rate project, the Housing Accountability Act can't be used to force that project's approval. But what this Wicks bill does is it reduces the standard from being 20% affordable to being 10% affordable. And in a lot of cases, I mean, bear in mind, affordable can mean lots of different things. It can be lower income, it can be very low income, it could be extremely low income. All of those are all affordable. I don't think there is a separate standard for moderate income, but it's much tougher for moderate income. So that lowering that standard means the projects are going to have much less impact on the affordable housing problems that the state has. And that, after all, is the justification for all of these legislative actions, is saying we need more affordable housing. But building more market rate housing, aside from what the YIMBYs think, for most people will be considered, doesn't really do anything about affordable housing. We could talk some more about that some other time. But at any rate, this bill would basically boost the applicability of the Housing Accountability Act. It also has some various other detailed problems in terms of making the Housing Accountability Act that much more lethal and more damaging to local control. So that's the bill. Let me show you a little bit about the details of it. Okay, so here we are with AB 1893, and this is the end of the report, the committee report for the last committee, and it shows what's happened. It again, it's gone through the assembly already, passed everything. This was from one of the Senate committees, and the main thing I wanted to point out here is who are the sponsors and who are the supporters and opponents. And what you'll see here is that it was, again, the sponsor was Rob Bonta. You will see that there are some of the, if you will, the usual suspects: California Apartment Association, California Building Industry Association, California YIMBY. That's going to be almost all of these bills have been supported by California YIMBY. Inner City Law Center has been the sponsor for a couple of other bills. And then the 200 is an interesting group. It's a kind of an ad hoc group. It was set up by an attorney at one of the major firms that represents developers. And she is, I have to say, quite a piece of work. And she's been going after and attacking CEQA in particular, as saying CEQA again is damaging affordable housing, using pretty spurious articles, but nevertheless, that's her group. The other group that shows up often is SPUR, and I don't remember exactly that. It's an acronym. It's a housing advocacy group. If anyone happens to remember what the acronym stands for, something research, something in, I don't know. The last R is research. The R is for research.
They're out of San Jose and San Francisco, big troublemakers. Terrible. Right. Sorry.
Yes. And here's the opposition. And as you can see, there's a lot of opposition to this bill. And it's quite significant. We're there, Livable, California. A lot of, and what's interesting is some YIMBY groups are opposing it. Mountain View YIMBY, Santa Cruz YIMBY, Santa Rosa YIMBY, San Francisco YIMBY. So this bill actually has opponents actually within the YIMBYs. But it also has a number of fairly prominent, so Planning and Conservation League is opposing it. They used to be, they're not as big a player now, but they used to be a big one on environmental laws. The National Alliance to End Homelessness is opposing this bill. So there's some sizable opposition. And let's go back to, I'm sorry to have to be shifting around so much, but let's go back to the summary I put together for the bill, which is it were quick and dirty. Okay, so here's the bill. So it complication widens the applicability of the housing accountability. In other words, it makes it even harder to understand, even harder to figure out how it applies, and it reduces the affordability requirement. And this is a list of the major groups supporting and opposing it. So that's, I think we have at least a decent shot at getting that bill knocked out, except the fact that it's, although this is in Senate appropriations. So this bill, we have a decent shot perhaps of getting it knocked out, because there are a lot of bills of groups opposing it. Yeah, Libby?
Can I before you went on, and maybe it, I'm having a real problem with why and how the Attorney General can be a sponsor of any bill, because it seems like kind of, the idea like Trump wanting to weaponize
The Department of Justice. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, remember, the Attorney General here in California is independently elected. And so he's got the voters, as it were. He can say the voters elected me, and I have a mandate from the voters. And the Attorney General will often introduce legislation. Well,
but he obviously has a conflict of interest.
Well, yes and no. The Attorney General is the law, as it were, the attorney representing the state, and he may feel that a particular action, legislative action, is in the interest of the state. And that's happened often in the past. And the Attorney General will often jump in and support or oppose legislation. Not that often, but it is rather unusual for the Attorney General to actually sponsor legislation. But remember, this Attorney General has really come down hard on housing issues, and
that's why he has a conflict of interest.
Well, it's not exactly a conflict of interest, because, for example, he comes in and he will say, I am supporting the application of this law. This is a law the legislature passed, and people are not paying attention to it. I'm not following it. I'm going to come and jump in and maybe even file a lawsuit against this city or against this group for violating state law. And he has that ability.
Doesn't make it right or ethical.
Remember that the Attorney General is not a court. Courts have to be neutral. The Attorney General doesn't have to be.
Oh.
At any rate, I mean, yes, we'd all like it
if
the Attorney General maybe were not as pro-YIMBY as he is, but nevertheless, the Attorney Generals in the past have often jumped in. And Duke Majan, if you remember, was an Attorney General, and he jumped in on the conservative side and was very active in filing litigation against people that he didn't like, that he thought weren't following the conservative line. So this is, unfortunately, or for better or worse, this is a long-standing thing for Attorney Generals. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is by Alvarez, and this is the one that
Stuart, before you go on to the next one, one thing that was in AB 1893 was a clause in there that says if the community or the jurisdiction is meeting their RENA numbers, that bill would not be applicable to them. And I would encourage people to ensure that that clause is in any housing bill, because I don't think if you're meeting your RENA numbers, you should be subjected to any of these new housing bills.
You have to realize that almost nobody is in full compliance with all of their arena numbers.
They're all
Well,
set up to fail.
At least, especially for the low and especially for the very low income.
but
Those
for the communities that are, they shouldn't be penalized
right
for
I think
meeting
that
the
may
arena
be-
numbers by these
Yeah.
housing bills.
Yeah, that certainly would be true. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that we're now in a new arena cycle, and those numbers have bounced up way high. And essentially HCUD is really pretty much guaranteed that nobody's going to meet all the arena numbers this next cycle. So yes, it's a good thing to have that in there saying that all of these bills shouldn't apply if you're meeting all of your arena requirements, all your arena goals. But I think in the maybe it was this cycle or maybe the last cycle, I think there were 4 cities in the whole state of California that met all of their arena goals.
Yeah, and I live in Santa Ana, and we exceeded the arena goals by 2,400% on all levels of income. And here we get a new cycle, and we're meeting the requirements again already, and yet we're going to be subjected to these housing bills, and I'm just infuriated.
That's not a bad idea to say that these bills are not, none of these bills should apply to you if you're already meeting all your arena goals.
Yeah, it would encourage people to meet their requirements, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, the real problem is with HCDs, and you'll see one of these bills that's we're coming to fairly shortly. That's AB 3093, adds 2 more goals to the arena goals at the very low end, the ones that are going to be the absolute hardest to meet. And I can almost guarantee nobody's, because these are basically saying you've got to provide enough housing for people who have 0 income.
Great.
In essence, what it's basically saying, you have to have enough housing to provide permanent housing to anyone who's homeless. And which, yes, that would be a nice goal if you had a way of meeting it. But the way RENA has been weaponized, if you don't meet the goals, then you're in big trouble. Then all of these things like the Housing Accountability Act and all these things like SB 35, all of those things get triggered if you don't meet all your RENA goals. And so it's a tremendously powerful weapon. And this bill at 3093 will make it even more powerful, make it so virtually no place in the state will meet the arena goals. So we'll get to that very shortly. But that's just something to keep in mind in terms of how meaningful is saying if you meet all your arena goals, these bills shouldn't apply to you. It's going to be almost impossible, especially if AB 3093 passes. All right, let's get back here. So going on to AB 2560, this was a bill as initially written. It would say that density bonus law trumps the Coastal Act. That says essentially, if you've got a project that's a density bonus project, the Coastal Act doesn't matter, and you can put in your density bonus project in the coastal zone, regardless of what it does to the coast. That got when it was going through the assembly, the last committee it went through, they made major changes. No, it was in the Senate. The last place it went to, the last committee it went to in the Senate, which might have been natural resources. I'm not sure. I think it was. At any rate, they said, no, that's not okay. And it was there's a place, they've got the actual video of that committee hearing, and it is eye-opening in terms of seeing that there are some senators that really do believe in, or on natural resources and believe on protecting natural resources, amazingly enough. And they put in amendments to the bill, and what those amendments say is that essentially no longer does density bonus trump the Coastal Act. What you now have to do is you have to harmonize whatever density bonus provisions, you have to harmonize those with the coastal plan, a local coastal plan, and the Coastal Act, such that no significant damage is done to coastal resources. And bear in mind that the Coastal Commission has been very strong in protecting the coast and coastal resources. I think you'll notice if you look at the list of people supporting and opposing, there were some bills, some groups supporting it, not surprising, Cal YIMBY, Greenbelt Alliance, surprisingly perhaps Western Center for Law and Poverty, but now look at who was opposing: Coastal Commission, NRDC, Center for Biological Diversity, Environment California, Surfrider Foundation, a whole list, plus about 20 or 30 cities, all coastal cities, all opposed it. And most of them said oppose unless amended. And essentially what they all says, density bonus projects should not trump the Coastal Act. And the modification that was made essentially says that the Coastal Act continues to apply, that if you're going to do a density bonus project in the coastal zone, you can only do it if it doesn't do any damage to coastal resources. And that's what the Coastal Act is really about, is not damaging coastal resources. So, and also allowing public access to the coast. So that they really defanged the bill to a very, very major extent. Let me show you for a second. Okay, so this, let's see, this was 1893. Let me move on to the next one, which was, yeah. So this is, and you can see here are the supporters. You know, again, the usual suspects: California Apartment Associations, Associated General Contractors, they're often a usual suspect, community builders, California YIMBY, a few cities, Long Beach, San Diego, all the YIMBY groups. And now look at the opposition. You have Bologna Wetlands Institute, unless amended. California, let's see, California Coastal Commission, and that one, it turns out, was less amended. They withdrew their opposition. Coastkeeper Alliance, California Environmental Voters, River Watch, Native Plant Society, Center for Biological Diversity, and a lot of cities. And so it was a very long list, but a lot of those said unless amended, and most of those, even if they didn't say unless amended, they have mostly dropped their opposition because of the changes. They feel like the bill has been defanged. It's not entirely an empty bill. It still is pushing a bit on allowing density bonus projects in the coastal zone, but really with major cautions. I'm sorry?
Oh, wait a minute. Do we have chocolate croissant in?
Hold, Catherine, could you mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jane, you had a question?
My question is, based on the amendment, are we still opposing it?
We haven't decided that yet, but I suspect that we're probably going to drop our opposition.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, again, most of the groups that were opposing it have dropped their opposition, and it seems like it has become a not a totally ineffectual bill, but not a dangerous bill. And we want to kind of keep our powder dry in order being able to have our opposition be effective. Okay, let's go on to the next bill. And that's AB 3093. This one I was mentioning a little earlier. This is by ward. This adds new goals, new low income levels. One is called extremely low income, and the other one has someone, it's even more dramatic than that. I think basically the lowest one, below extremely low income, goes down to zero. It includes anybody who has got zero income. And this basically said you've got to have goals for providing housing for people that have no income. which means essentially anybody who's homeless. And so they have to, the HCD would then have to come up with saying, how many homeless people are there in California, and how are we going to house all of those homeless people? And the problem with that is, as I say here, it sets these goals, but provides no funding help in achieving those goals. In other words, it basically drops it on the local agency, says, you figure out how you meet these goals, because no commercial developer is ever going to do a project. And those two goals, those two levels, income levels, aren't even there in the density bonus law. So you don't even get an extra density bonus for doing these extremely low income projects. They're, you know, why would anyone ever do them?
How did I put my, sorry, this is Jenny. I put my hand up, but we had two things. One of them is a lot of homeless people wander around. They go from city to city. And if one city cleans up, they may go to the other city. We had that court ruling based out of Oregon, of Supreme Court, where now you can move encampments away, etc. How does this, whoever Mr. Ward is, I guess he's assembly, how he obviously did this before the Supreme Court ruling. How are these other groups supporting this, even understanding how anyone is, if the state won't support these people, the cities are supposed to provide housing for floating homeless people? I don't get it. I mean,
that's basically what it's saying, is saying if you've got homeless people in your city, or at least what it's saying is the state, the HCD is supposed to figure out how many homeless people do we expect to have in the state. And then they send those totals down to the various regional agencies like ABAG and the what is it?
MTC.
Not MTC. This is all ABAG, or in the case of Southern California, SCAG, or Sandag. Yeah, all of those different regional agencies who then parcel that homeless population out to the individual cities and saying, this is your share, this is your share. Now, you may or may not have those people living in your city right this minute, but you have a goal, and you have to provide enough housing that you can say provide housing for 1,000 homeless people.
They couldn't even get, my husband worked on the census, and they couldn't even get a legitimate count because it was during the pandemic. And they're throwing this on every city in the state. I mean, are we going into like Russia land? I just don't get it, where these people are going. It's
you know, again, that's the basis for our opposition, is basically saying, yes, it would be nice to provide housing for these all extremely low income people. And yes, it would be nice to be able to provide housing for everybody, or the availability of housing for everyone who's currently homeless. Not necessarily saying they've got to take it, but you have to provide enough housing so they could take it if they wanted to. That's all nice, but where's the money coming from? And the state in this bill says, oh, local agencies can find funding for it. Well, how are they going to do that? It's essentially
passing the buck.
Well, what it amounts to is it's basically saying you're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. If you want to provide the funding to build the necessary amount of housing for homeless people, you're going to have to cut something else. Maybe you cut all your parks and recreation budget. Maybe you cut your fire department. Maybe you cut the police department. But somewhere you're going to have to cut something. And we know that cities right now are all struggling. There isn't the money to do everything they need to do, even as it is. This is putting a huge extra burden on the cities. That's our reason for opposing the bill, saying not that, well, you shouldn't be providing housing for people who are homeless, but where's the money going to come from?
And HCD screwed up. They can't do statistics. They screwed the RENA numbers up. So I'm sure they're going to screw up the homeless numbers too.
Probably. And what this really amounts to is that it's another excuse for all the SB 35 projects and other and Housing Accountability Act things to be triggered in every single city in the state. So that's our opposition reason for this one. And again, you can see that there are interestingly public interest law project. I suppose some of the groups that are supporting this are basically saying, yes, you should be providing housing for people who are very low, extremely low income, or who are homeless. that's a very commendable goal, but that's not taking into account what the effect of this is on local agencies, which is there's no money. And if you're giving a goal and you're not giving any money to reach that goal, it's fantasy land. So that's AB 3093. Last one here is AB 3122. This is a bill that was modified pretty significantly. It was not that outrageous a bill. In fact, we didn't comment on it in the first house because it didn't seem that bad. Then it was amended, and now it's a lot worse. What this is doing is this is a bill that would modify SB 35, and SB 35, if you remember, is the bill that gives developers the ability to come in and get a project approved by right if a city or county has not met its RENA goals. And depending on which RENA goal you didn't meet, you have to build certain percentages of affordable housing as part of it. And if you've met that goal, I think the minimum goal right now is 20%, has been 20% affordable housing. And if it doesn't meet, if the jurisdiction hasn't met its RENA goals and the project includes at least 20% affordable housing, the city has no choice. It has to approve it. This has allowed, and there's no CEQA review. There are some particular limitations on where you can do this. One of the ones that this one knocks out, 3122 knocks out, is it says, oh, and by the way, no, I'm sorry, take that back. That was 423. That was Wiener's bill last session. But this bill basically says you can modify a project and you can modify it to reduce the amount of affordable housing. And as long as you stay within some limits, I think it's a 15% reduction in the amount of affordable housing, then the approval still stays as non-discretionary, as ministerial, with no CEQA review, no ability of the city to change the project, to modify the project, or to try and mitigate any of the effects of the project. And we think the biggest problem with this bill as it now stands, aside from the fact that you're essentially making it easier and easier to do SB 35 projects, is that the changes that are made to the project may require some sort of mitigation. Maybe not environmental mitigation, maybe it's fire protection, maybe it's more police availability, maybe it's simply having more parks and recreation. There are all kinds of things that changes to a project might say the city, we need to do something to protect us, to do something so this doesn't cause us damage. And this basically says you can't do that. You can't do anything to mitigate the project's impacts. So we think it's a bad bill. That's why we're opposing it, and we'll see where that gets us. We'll see. We're hoping that we can convince
Ash.
Well, Caballero. No, we're not going to convince Calera, but we might be able to convince Caballero to hold the bill.
Yeah, Ash Calera is a local Santa Clara County politician, and I am ashamed that he even was involved in this. I mean, I thought he was really, I'm appalled that he did this. And Valco just resurfaced in Cupertino. It's causing major political problems in the city. They are doing SB 35. This is directly related to, I can tell you, to Valco, it completely. So, thank you.
Tell your people in your district to write to Keller and say, this is a horrible bill. You should drop this bill. You should maybe change the bill and reintroduce it next session. This bill as it stands is not an acceptable bill.
Call the office on Monday. God, I'm so surprised.
How does this differ from AB 2243, which is essentially going to change the modification or change the requirements of AB 2011, which allowed developers to build by right if they met certain requirements. But AB 2243 essentially removes all the requirements of AB 2011, which it looks like this AB 3122 is doing the same thing to SB 35.
That may
So-
be, yeah. SB 35, the thing about it is, again, for any place that didn't meet all their RENA goals, any developer can come in and insist and apply for an SB 35 project. And we have one that's coming in locally where they have tied together SB 35, actually SB 423, which is, as you remember, is Wiener's modification to SB 35. And they've tied that together with density bonus to build an enormous project, which incredibly is less than 20% affordable housing. And somehow or another they think they can do that. I'm not sure. I haven't figured out how they're doing it, but these all of these laws, particularly when you combine them together and roll them up into a package, you can do kind of really crazy projects that don't really make sense from the standpoint of affordable housing.
So in this case, if SB 3122 is approved, does that essentially remove SB 35 from the rolls, and now SB 3122 is the trump card?
AB 3122 modifies SB 35. It modifies the statute, and it basically relaxes the limitations on SB 35 so that SB 35 projects become all that more powerful. This is a continuing saga of SB 35. Each session, Wiener or one of his allies will come in and try and further enlarge the reach of SB 35. I suppose in the ultimate game, it'll be that any developer can come into any city and do anything they want.
That's what it looks like they're doing. So
gradually, it's what is it? Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, Valco just resurfaced. Valco, I'll be real quick because I know you need to go on. Valco just resurfaced about 2 weeks ago in Cupertino. It's an classic SB 35, and they're doing something again. And I think that if the governor signs 3122, Valco will be able to take advantage of it in January. So the city of Cupertino needs to be aware that this project may be ramping up to use a bill by Calra, who is a local, I think he's Campbell, San Jose. And I mean, it's absolutely, we think that Valco contributed to the money to have SB 35 originally. It's criminal, seriously.
Yeah, well, the SB 35 project in Cupertino was one of the first SB 35 projects to come in the door, and I'm quite sure that the Valco, those folks that are doing the Valco project were talking to Wiener when he was writing SB 35.
Oh, we know so. We know so. He used it 1 month after 35 became legal. Just it's criminal.
All right, let's move on to the Senate bills. So the first one we're talking about here is SB 7. This is the one I mentioned that it was you might loosely say it was gut and amend, except it kept the same author, Blake Spear. A true gut and amend, they knock everything out of the bill except the bill number. It doesn't have the same author, doesn't have any of the same subject. It's an entirely new bill. All it shares is the bill number. This one, I think I don't think it even had anything to do with RENA. As it was first introduced, it was a relatively innocuous bill. And in fact, when it passed the Senate, it seemed innocuous. I don't think there was any opposition when it passed the Senate. Now it's become a bill that it modifies the procedures for approving RENA goals, and it prohibits appeals of some RENA goals. In other words, in particular, when HCD directly sets a RENA goal for a local agency, a municipality or a county, rather than going through a regional agency, rather than going through an ABAG or anyways, one of these regional groups that divvies up the arenas. In some cases, when there isn't a regional agency, HCD directly sets the RENA goals for the local agency. And in those cases, what this bill says, you can't challenge that. And the other thing that we think is really horrible about this bill is right now, the Senate had, actually the legislature had authorized an audit of HCD, particularly in how it does the RENA. And that's likely to come out with major problems with how HCD does RENA, and changes that need to be made in the RENA process to correct those problems. And that audit is still going on right now. The results are not yet available, and yet they're going ahead and changing procedures. It's sort of trying to start moving the cart before the horse has even been attached to it. So that's the reason why we're opposing the bill, saying this is way premature. You need to wait for the audit results before you start fiddling further with RENA. It has been supported by the California Apartment Association, the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. There are very few supporters or opponents because this was so recently amended. As far as I know, I think we are the only group that has submitted an opposition to the bill. But we're hoping that other people will come up and support it, will oppose it too. But again, now the one thing about this bill, because it was changed after it had passed the Senate, it's going to have to come back to the Senate. So there is the possibility that when it comes back to the Senate will say, no, we're not going to approve this. That's where we really can have best hope of stopping it. Moving on to SB 951, this is a bill that's been around for a while. This is one of the Wiener bills. This one is about the Coastal Commission and the local coastal plans. And what, as originally written, it was going to exempt San Francisco from the Coastal Act. Just take it out entirely. Say the Coastal Act doesn't apply in San Francisco. That got a lot of pushback from us and a lot of other groups, including the Coastal Commission. And so they backed off. It now requires that when a local agency under pressure from HCD amend its housing element, it has to immediately at the same time also amend its local coastal plan. That puts a lot of stress on local agencies to do two things at once. We think it's very stressful, unnecessary. And also, in particular, in San Francisco, it narrows the ability to appeal a housing project to the Coastal Commission if it's in the coastal zone within San Francisco. Again, we think those are all bad things. Let me go to just a second. Let me get that up here. Yeah, let me go to support and oppose. Okay, so here's the support and oppose for 951. Not surprising, California Apartment Association, all the IMBY groups, but not too much beyond that. As Spur is supporting it, urban environmentalist, whatever that is. Opposition, Catalyst, Encinitas, Mission Street Neighbors, Livable California, Save Lafayette, and Aaron Peskin, who is, as you know, as a supervisor in San Francisco and is running for mayor. And then Oceanside said oppose against unless amended. So we think there's some possibility of getting this held in appropriations, but again, bearing in mind that that committee is chaired by our friend in the assembly,
Buffy.
Yeah, Buffy. We think it's unlikely that it will get defeated in committee, and we'll probably have to deal with that on the assembly floor, which is going to be tough. So next one is SB 960, another Wiener bill. This one's kind of weird. It has to do with transportation rather than directly housing, but it says that it would require Caltrans to implement complete streets on all state highway projects. And bear in mind that state highway projects don't just include projects that are within cities and sometimes aren't even really highways. So for example, in some of you who are local to our area in the Bay Area may know that Ashby Avenue in Berkeley is a state highway. And so this would apply complete streets to that street, which is not implausible, but it would also apply to, excuse me, to, for example, Interstate 80 and Highway 101. All those would all have to have complete streets, which means you have to have pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities on all of those highways. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and certainly does not. There's no consideration of cost effectiveness. And
Highway 17 to Santa Cruz? They are insane. I'm sorry, these people are stark rating mad. This is
Wiener. You know, Wiener is he's got his ideas, and interestingly enough, some of the groups opposing this are the Associated General Contractors and the California Operating Engineers Union. So those are basically those who were actually involved in the construction. They're saying this is crazy. This is not very good use of our money, of the money to have us building these things on state highways. We're hoping we have a possibility, again, given that Buffy is not specifically a highway person. Maybe she can be convinced that this is not good in terms of cost effectiveness, and maybe they can be convinced that from a standpoint of the budget, this is not the time to implement this. I'm not sure whether Caltrans itself has taken a position on it. But yeah, so that, you know, we're going to try and stop it, but we'll see. The next one is SB 1123 Caballero. This was sponsored by Cal YIMBY, California Building Industry Association, and LISC San Diego. I'm not sure what the LISC stands for. Maybe some of you who are from San Diego can enlighten us. But what it does is it broadens the range of subdivision projects that would require ministerial approval. So there is a small category of subdivision. Bear in mind, subdivision projects are what happens before you have a regular actual housing project. You have first you've got a big piece of land. First, you have to subdivide it into units that you can then provide proposed projects on. So that's subdivision, and there is a limited provision that allows you can subdivide a parcel, excuse me, into 4 subparcels without, on a ministerial basis, without SEQR review. This would expand that to 10. I'm sorry, 10 parcels. So it would allow you to take a single parcel, split it up into 10 parcels, and build a project on each of those 10 parcels with no SEQR review and no discretion. This one, it is opposed by the League of California Cities, and we are opposing it. There isn't a lot of opposition, but there isn't a lot of support either. So it's hard to know what will happen to it. The fact that it's got the YIMBY supporting it and CBIA supporting it means there's going to be a lot of lobbyists running around and pushing on it. So we're hoping we can stop it, but I have to say it's somewhat of a long shot. The last bill is SB 1211 from Skinner, and this is sponsored by Cal YIMBY, not surprisingly, and a group called the Casita Coalition. This eliminates parking requirements on ADUs and allows, the most important part is it allows ministerial approval of multiple ADU projects. So for example, you can have a project that would be building 8 ADUs on a single parcel, and under this it would be ministerial with no parking. The effects of this in urban areas, particularly areas that have limited on-street parking, are hard to imagine, but they're not going to be good. Again, this has got support from all the YIMBY groups. It is a support from Bay Area Council and as I mentioned earlier, the 200. Opposing it, there's us, there's the League of California Cities, several cities, Santa Clarita and Whittier, and Catalyst. So there's not a huge group of supporters, not a huge group of opponents, there's some possibility we can convince this to be held, because the argument, I think the main argument of this is going to put a lot of extra costs on local agencies in implementing this. And where's the money going to come from?
Stuart, you're not listing all of them, are you?
No, let me,
I wrote one for Save Lafayette.
hold on, let me
It's a good idea.
Sorry.
give the list of those opposing, so you can see that. I think Save Lafayette is on it.
Cupertino just implemented a massive missing middle when they certified by housing element. It wasn't required, but the YIMBY groups got missing middle in. Every corner lot in the entire city can have ADUs all over it, no parking requirements. So these people are aiding and abetting. Skinner is termed out. I am so glad.
Yeah, but her replacement is
till
unfortunately
1928.
likely to be even better.
Buffy.
Where are we at? Here we go, SB 1211. So this is there's Cal YIMBY and Casita, AARP, Abundant Housing, Bay Area Council. There's a lot of and a lot of housing groups, including some nonprofit, Eden Housing, Housing Action Coalition, all the YIMBY groups. And the opposing, here's California Cities for Local Control, Catalyst, Huntington Beach, League of California Cities, Livable California, Mission Street Neighbors, there's Save Lafayette's, Sunnyvale, the United Neighbors, and Whittier. So not a huge list of opponents. I guess my thought is there aren't that many places where people are going to want to build 8 ADUs on a single lot. That's, and bear in mind, these have to be aside from the main building on the lot. You have to have a house, and then the ADUs are associated with the house. And so you've got you build a house, unless you've got a very, let's say for example, maybe you're in some place where they're 5-acre lots, you could build your house, and then you'd still have lots of space to build ADUs on it. But if you're talking about, say, a 1/4-acre lot, you put your house on the 1/4-acre lot, and now maybe you can put 2, maybe even 3, but 8, it's hard to even know how you fit them.
You're doing duplexes in Cupertino on the corner lots, and in San Jose, you can sell your ADU now.
Yeah, and I think there was a bill that was going to allow in general that ADUs could be sold separately from the main house.
Stuart, where did you get this list again? Is it something that's on that government website, or is it something you guys...
This list here that I'm showing you right now?
Yeah.
Legislative analysis.
Yeah, that's come from Ledge Info, and that was the local government committee's staff report.
Okay, thanks.
That was the last policy committee. There will be a committee report for appropriations, but the appropriations committee reports are often pretty skimpy because it's kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down, and the chair essentially makes all the decisions. Basically, most of the committee members will just rubber stamp whatever the chair proposes. Actually, I'm not even sure they even take a formal. I think they do take formal votes, but it's saying, okay, all those in favor, all opposed, motion passes. So that's where we're at. As I said, these are the bills that we are still working on. For the most part, the other bills either have gotten beyond where we can do anything about them, and say, which is not to say that they've all been approved. A lot of them are still going to have to go through the full last house, and again, in a couple of cases, they're going to have to come back for concurrence in the other house. But it's hard to organize opposition, especially when you're a small group like we are, at the full legislature, at the full, full assembly or full Senate, because it means going around and talking to every single legislator, or at least every single legislature you think you can influence. Those of you who have senators or assembly members who you think you can put some pressure on, who aren't necessarily opposing you or supporting you, it may be worth calling their office. and saying, look, I want to talk to you about this bill and that bill and why we think you should be voting against them.
I'll call Ash Kalra's office on Monday because, you know, I thought he was like a good guy, but this is just abhorrent. I thank you so much, Stuart. You have opened our eyes to reality in Sacramento.
I'm afraid sometimes you kind of wish you could keep your eyes closed, but it doesn't help.
Nightmare on Sacramento Street.
As they say, what you don't see can hurt you. Okay, that's all I have. Rick, let's see. Were there other things that we were?
We can just open it to discussion in general about bills, and then go on to anything anybody else wants to bring up, the local issue that might be of interest statewide. Reminder that the legislature is on recess, which means a lot of the legislators will be back in their district offices. It's a good time for you or your community group to get meetings either with the legislator, him or herself, or with their staff, in trying to get things, your influence in, whether it's on a specific bill or not. It's good to be have interaction with the legislator or his staff, get to be known, so that particularly with staff, you can interact with them on a continuing basis in the next session, and maybe have some influence on how the legislator votes, or at least make your views known. So I think that's an important thing to do during this recess is, as always, get to know your legislator and their staff, and get them to know you or your group. Another thing is on any bills that you're concerned with, whether they're on our list or not, if you haven't, make yourself heard. If you haven't sent in your second house letter, go ahead. At least appropriations may see it and take into account your views, or particularly with the appropriations committees. While sometimes they'll hold something on a policy basis, if their specified concern is state spending. So if you can show them that something will impact state spending significantly in the current budget issues, they may take that into account and hold the bill for another time. Stu, anything else that you think of in general people could be doing or should be doing?
Well, I think when you're trying to set up a meeting with the local legislator, if you've got a group, then try and get a few representatives of the group, so that the person or their staff is aware that this is not just one single person. This is a group that, again, it helps. The more your legislator knows who you are and has had some past familiarity, the more they will pay attention to you. And if you're going to be talking to staff, you want to try, if possible, to either meet with the chief of staff or with the person on the staff that is specific to your particular area that you want to talk about. So if it's housing, you want to talk to the staff person who's dealing with housing. If it's transportation, the staff person who's dealing with transportation. Try and get somebody who's in that related area, so they're more likely to understand your concerns and be able to talk to you about them.
Yeah, and frankly, that person is more likely to be understand what you have to say and be knowledgeable on the subject than the legislator is. Unfortunately, with somebody sent me an email the other day, just said too many bills to deal with, and that is the case for the legislators themselves. You know, very often they'll on the floor, they're going to be voting on all these bills. They're not going to have read most of them, probably any of them. They rely on their staff. So you know, if their staffer knows, you know, if you can get their staffer influenced, you have a better chance of that, frankly, than influencing the legislator and him or herself.
Yeah, and bear in mind, it's not absolutely out of the question to get a bill amended, even at this late date. It's not all that likely. But for example, if a bill is being carried by a legislator, but is a sponsored bill, and the sponsor is somebody other than the legislator, then you may be able to talk to that legislator's staff person and convince that staff person, you know, yeah, I understand that the idea behind this bill is a good one, but here's the problem that this bill doesn't address and needs to, and this is why you need to make this modification to the bill. And we've had a little bit of luck working through the legislator's staff to get a bill modified, to get some amendments done by the author. And those can be made as late as on the floor.
Okay,